Welcome everyone to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. My name is Michelle Zaldivar. I am your program coordinator over at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, doing a couple of student highlights and announcements before we officially get started for the day. If you haven't already, please make sure to take a second and sign in. And if you see the link after your sign in and your confirmation, or you're checking out that Go link at the bottom of our welcome screen here, you can read the article that today's session is kind of inspired by, right, at go.fiu.edu/TTR Jan 25. That's January 25th. That's today. A reminder that global learning medallion students, right? TTR is always 1 point. Make sure that you take a screenshot of your sign in, do whatever you got to do so that you can log this particular session into your points log for submission. TTR and honor students, if you're hiding in there too, this is 1 point for you. If you want to learn more about the medallion or any of our other programs, including PC Prep and the Millennium Fellowship, which Global Learning Office is putting together a team focused on environmental studies and activism this year. If you're curious to learn more about that, make sure you shoot us an email over at glmedal@fiu.edu. Also a reminder that the deadline for transformation contest is quickly approaching. January 31st is our deadline for submissions to transformation contests. You can win a trip to DC to meet all sorts of governments and nonprofit entities that are operating out of DC based on you sharing your international or intercultural experience and perspective. This QR code right here is going to take you to a page that's got more information, including how it's judged, what the deadlines are, and you can read more about past winners and past trips. Or you can go to go.fiu.edu/GL contests for more information. Any questions? Make sure to reach out to us. You can also hear more from past winners on our Instagram this week at Go Global FIU. So make sure to follow us there and check out those stories. If you've gotten to that point that you went to that, go.fiu.edu/TTR Jan 25 and you got stuck because it asked you for a subscription, a reminder, everyone in the FIU community has a free complimentary subscription to the New York Times. So if you got stuck and you got that window, then you can go ahead and visit accessnyt.com so you can validate your subscription with your FIU credentials, or just find more information at go.fiu.edu/TTR. I want to shout out really quick to Miss Sherry Beeson, who's our senior program coordinator, manning the chat and manning the waiting room and getting everything, operating as we continue through Zoom. Sherry, you want to say hi?
Hey, you guys, it's good to see you back.
And we have a very special guest today introducing our speakers. Yenny Simon, our Assistant Program Director here at the Office of Global Learning Initiatives, is here to introduce our speakers for today. So Yenny, I pass it over to you.
Thank you. Super excited to be here. It's been a while and I don't see faces, but I see a lot of familiar names. So to all of you here today, I'm glad you're coming to the Tuesday Times Roundtables. I'm especially slightly biased about today. It's really such an important topic personally, so I'm really thrilled that I have the opportunity to introduce the speakers today. First, we have Amaka Amalu, a professional engineer who is the founder at Tech Girl Power, a nonprofit that you learned a lot about. And actually, I'm just going to do the plug really quickly. A nonprofit that's looking for an intern, and I'll send my Global Learning Medallion students an email about that. It's an awesome paid internship, so more on that to come from my end. And Amaka is also the managing director and lead mechanical engineer at WSP. Amaka is a STEM for Girls advocate on a mission to ensure more girls, especially those from lower socioeconomic areas, who are experiencing a tech and digital divide, are included in this fast-growing field. Initially intending to be a teacher or a child psychologist, she experienced the joys of engineering in her last year at St. Thomas Aquinas High School and altered her career path. Fusing her love of engineering and mentoring young girls, she founded Tech Girl Power in 2016, with her work garnering her the 2020 Emerging Philanthropist Award from Philanthropy Miami and the Miami Foundation. With over 14 years of experience in the male-dominating field of engineering and being a 1% in her field, she has acquired unique insights, which she instills in the girls and women she works with. Amaka, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And then we have Denise Mendez, who is a principal software engineer at Microsoft Mixed Reality. Denise is a cross-functional systems engineer, leading a strategy, driving solutions, creating value, while engineering in the gaps with a proven track record of unlocking simple solutions within complex systems. She has been instrumental in shipping multi-million-dollar products and projects, as well as uncovering and unblocking the clogs between the teams that prevent them from shipping at quality and scale. Having worked in space technology, mobile consumer products, and cutting-edge technology like mixed reality, and I'm so intrigued by that. She's also a mom, an entrepreneur, a potter, a mountain biker, and an award-winning public speaker. Denise, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining. And I'm going to turn it over to the superstars here today. Thank you, Michelle, for allowing me to introduce these two amazing speakers.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that introduction. We are so excited to be here. And thank you again to all of you and to FIU for inviting us to be part of this roundtable. So we're so excited. Again, my name is Amaka Amalu, and I've already been introduced, so I'm not going to go into that spiel again. But and I'll just have Denise, if you want to quickly just introduce yourself again, I guess, since the picture's on here.
Yeah, so I'm also an electrical engineer. I started my career as an electrical engineer and kind of did systems engineering, and then I'm doing software engineering now. So also feel free if you have any questions in the chat, specifically about careers or anything that you heard that may be a little bit different from the topic. You know, while Amaka and I are going back and forth, we'd be happy to like either add that to the conversation or type, answer in the chat. So please use the chat.
Thank you. And how many years experience do you have, Denise, again?
20? Oh, yeah. I have 20 years of experience in engineering.
Yes.
Yeah, more than 20. I'm aging myself. I went to FIU in like 1996 and 97, nice. My first 2 years. I did all my undergraduate work there, and then I did my electrical engineering degree at U of F, and my husband is from FIU. He got an electrical engineering degree there as well. So FIU is one of my hearts.
Perfect. Well, I went to the University of Central Florida, and I've been an engineer for 14 years now. So Denise has way more years experience than me also. So hopefully we can provide some great insight with this presentation and roundtable topic today. So today's roundtable topic is on changes and challenges for women in engineering and tech. And this is based off the New York Times article that was called "Making Gains for Women in STEM Fields Will Take More Effort." So the agenda for today is we're going to quickly go over statistics, which I'm sure everybody knows the statistics already, but kind of have to do the intro. Then we'll talk about some of the challenges that women face in tech and in engineering, some of the changes that we're seeing, some positive changes that we're seeing all around in this field. We'll also give out some advice from our experience and working in this male-dominated field of STEM, and then of course go through any questions that the audience might have. Now we'll still also be reaching out to the audience in between some of these slides to get some input from the audience also. So we're also looking forward to that. So we're hoping everybody will participate in that one. So first up, statistics. We all know that there's a low percentage of women in STEM and in tech and engineering fields. Based off the New York Times article, there was a quote there that relates to that. It says, "STEM remains mostly a man's world. It has nothing to do with cognitive abilities, which has been proven. It is about consistent, deeply entrenched stereotypes, period." right? So that's one of the main reasons behind this huge gap that you see between men and women in STEM. Now let's just quickly look at some of the, sorry, I cannot see my screen. Let me just move this. Perfect. So let's just quickly look at this chart here. It shows the percentage of women in STEM fields over time from the 1990s to 2016. As you can see, we're doing very well in the health-related field. I think the men are actually suffering in that one. For life sciences, we went from 34% to 47%. That's pretty much almost 50, so that's great. For math, we only grew about 3% over time, but still, we're still a large chunk of that percentage. Physical science from 22 to 39. And for computer, which was very surprising, we went from 32% down to 25%. And Denise is going to touch on that in the next slide a little bit to explain why that happened. And then for engineering, my part, we only grew about 2%, 12% to 14% in 2016. And it's sad, right? But I did look up some recent statistics for 2019, and we actually went up 1% to 15%. So that actually is a huge improvement because it was 2% over almost 30 years, and now it's 1% over 3 years. So, whatever work we're doing, all the STEM organizations, all trying to push women into STEM and engineering, seems to be working for engineering. Even if it's slow, it's working, right? And then Denise, if you want to touch on computer science for women.
Michelle was gonna maybe take a moment to do the poll real quick while we're.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So let her pop up the poll. All right. I want to see this one. How confident and hopeful do you feel about the future of girls and women in STEM? Maybe we should have done that before you just saw Amaka's last slide, huh?
I know. No, it's tainted. The field is tainted. Oh boy. Well, think about that 1% growth from 16 to 2019.
How long does the poll take? Or are people answering, Michelle?
Yeah, they are. So I was
Do we
gonna
need a
I'll give
drum roll?
everyone a couple more seconds here before I close it. In 3, 2, 1. Where are our current ideas? Here they are.
Oh, 39%. 3, 5.
We're more hopeful than not. The glass is definitely half full with this crew. I love it.
Yes.
Got optimism in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great
Awesome.
to see. Great to see.
Thanks for participating in that. If you want to go to the slide, I want to share, this is Women in Computer Science. And I read this article. It was in the NPR, National Public Radio. I think they had this article, and they had a New York Times article on this as well. And the red curve is women in computer science before 1984, and then going kind of downhill after 1984. And kind of like a really interesting thing that happened in 1984, and what this article talks about, is Apple released their first Mac computer, their personal computer for the home. And so what happened is parents at the time saw this machine and said, hey, it's something for my kids to learn, but particularly it's a big blocky machine looking like things, and it's not a soft plushy toy or a doll. So they actually bought this for their boys and not for their girls, and they would put it in their boys' room. And so before 1984, women and men would get to college and professors were like, if you have a pulse and you can do math, I can teach you how to code. Right? They were desperate for anybody to program their computers because they had these fancy dandy doodads, and they were trying to figure out what to do with them. And then after 1984, about 5 years later, you see these 14-year-old and 15-year-old boys going to college, and they can actually, like, they walk in and they can turn on the computer, and they know what the keyboard does, and they can input some things into it, like basic things. But the girls are like, what is this? I've never seen one of these things before in my life. And it actually ended up creating a bro culture and a bad culture for women. It actually started saying like, oh, women, you guys are stupid. You don't know what you're doing. And men, it's like, oh, these boys are super geniuses. And it had nothing to do with capabilities at all, because women are just as great programmers as men. It's just more that they were exposed to it first. They saw it first. They knew some rudimentary things about it. They just knew little bits. They couldn't program it. They couldn't do anything. And it's one of those, unfortunate and unintended consequences, but something that we'll talk about for you all as something that you can do as part of our little advice section. So kind of in the next slide, we're going to chat or unmute yourself or raise your hand. What challenges do you see today, like preventing more women going into STEM field? Anybody brave on the call that wants to share? Just go ahead and unmute yourself and or type in the chat. Trying to look for some audience participation because y'all are really quiet. Bro culture continues to be prevalent. Thank you, Juanita. Yes, it is definitely a challenge. Andrea.
Hi, yes. I assume that nowadays there's maybe the want to the desire for things to come easier with the way our culture is, maybe selling pictures, or not that, they're bad or like to compare, but sometimes maybe people want the easier things in life.
Yep. Social media influencers, being these Instagrammers or YouTubers, they think it's easy money. It's actually that's not easy money. And this goes into, like, we'll get into this later about where you are on the adoption curve of technology and why being on these edge of the curves, like I am in mixed reality, is really important for you in your career and actually trying to be that social influencer. And anybody else, want to share something about other challenges they see today? And thank you, Andrea, for being brave and sharing with us, and Juanita as well.
I think
Emily
has her hands up.
Yes. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I would say, especially growing up in Miami, the machismo culture that surrounds us, I mean, it's kind of very much embedded into our family structure. And even if you are a confident woman, it's kind of hard to kind of share those dreams and goals with your family, especially if they have such ingrained machismo. Kind of limits your confidence in yourself, and it definitely affects the way you perceive yourself in front of other people. And I think that also has to do too, like, what challenges do we see too is lack of representation. I mean, when we do see women in tech, they're obviously like that one small minority, and then the men are the ones speaking for them. So I think that that's something that's very, very potent, and I hope to see a change, but let's see.
Yes, no, we're going to talk more about that. A lot of women wanting to see more women in higher leadership positions in tech and in STEM. So we'll go more into that issue further down in the slides. But yes, that is a major problem. I've been in STEM, and I've been an engineer for 14 years, and I'm always the only woman, always the only Black woman in the room, majority of the time. So yes, and we'll talk even about retention rates when we go forward, because just if it's in order for us to see more people who look like us, we need to actually keep women staying in STEM, promoting them, keeping them in STEM, right? So it's like almost like a cycle that's happening. So we'll talk more about that too. And I think there's another one, Michelle said, extending on the exposure elements. Boys up the earlier education are encouraged to video games and sciences. Yes, that's similar to what Denise said earlier too.
Yep.
Right. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Being Latina as well, I am, I think my saving grace is my dad. I was closest to my dad, and he was an engineer, and he's like, I love engineering, Denise, you'll do amazing. Like, he was super encouraging for me, but I am, in all the Latinas, like, I am the only Latina ever, like, in anything. The Amaka is 1%, I'm the other 1% in engineering. And it sucks, but, that's why we do this work, to kind of like, I love it. It is a bro culture, but I figured out through the course of the years how to get around it. So we'll talk, not around it, but like, be empowered by it. And we'll talk a little bit more about, that as we talk about the challenges, like in the next slide, it's a male dominated field, right? And there's stereotypes, and we have a low retention rate. Actually, most women will actually study engineering, and I've seen so many of them hit their 30s and then they leave. And they go into program management, or they just like completely leave the workforce, or they go into other fields. And it's kind of crappy. So if we'll talk about kind of like the bro culture side of it, there's a really great book called Brotopia that really was eye-opening for me because it made sense. And it talks about the PayPal mafia in the 90s, which are the people like the Elon Musks of the world and those people who are now like venture capitalists who are spending a bunch of money, were in that Brotopia that was created because of the computer, because of what happened in 1984. And it just created a generational gap of genders not being in these technical fields. The percentage of tech professionals who have experienced pervasive bro culture, Amaka and I could raise, both hands and feet at this. I see it a lot, including, when, especially early in career, like I never wanted to be treated differently because I was a girl, and I was really cognizant of 4 women in a class of 400 graduating in electrical engineers. 50% of us graduated with honors, by the way. It just starting early in career, it was like I'd have to watch football on the weekends. I hated this time of year. I hate football. In like 3 hours of my life sitting there watching men just chase a little ball around the room, like it was like the worst. And so I'd have to come in on Monday morning and do the water cooler talk. And that's like what everybody was doing, and it sucked. Like there was no one I could talk to about things like I wanted to talk about. So it kind of sucked in that domain. That there's a thing called code switching, which I would have to do a lot. Like if you look at computer programming, there's a switch and there's a case statement, and in case you're in your engineering world, talk about football, and in case you're outside of your engineering world, talk about all the other things that interest you. And so code switching was kind of big, at least early in career. I've figured out as I got older. I think the older you get, the less you care about, what people think, and the more you're like, you just come into your own. So as of late, I'm more of who I am rather than trying to fit a stereotype. In the next slide, we'll talk about one of the other things that impacts women in tech. And like this cartoon just nails it right on the money, right? Especially now with COVID. You see, like, it says, hey, engineering is a meritocracy. And like, they talk about like, well, why do you have to have a diversity interview? Why do you have to have one woman, when you're interviewing all these men? We're just looking for the best person for the job. But you don't see the full picture of individuals. Like a lot of women, like when I had kids in my 30s, like the laundry and the feeding and the driving and the carpooling, that stuff is real, man. That affects as much time and energy and effort that you can put into all the other things. So this is like a huge challenge for us, and now more so with COVID and the pandemic, because women actually exited the workforce because usually their partners were making more money, and so the care responsibility, and it's not just care for your children, it's care for the adults. Like I am a primary caregiver for my mom too, and my dad when he was here, like I was like, Denise, I was also tech support. Denise, the Wi-Fi is not working, or I can't log into my Google, or like, how do I log into Facebook again? Or my phone won't turn on. Mom, did you charge it? You plug in the thing. Oh, okay. So like the caregiver situation also is a big problem, and men often don't have this, right? And part of one of the things that we're talking about, like what's changing is our society, and the distribution of the housework is actually changing, especially with younger generations. Like I have a really amazing husband. Him and I trade off things. Like he gets up on Saturday mornings with the kids. I'm like, I am sleeping in today. You take care of breakfast and lunch and leave me the heck alone. Like this is like my day. But like we figured out how to find a balance. Like I suck at morning routines. I'll make breakfast, but I am such a grump. He'll actually get the kids up and get them ready for school. He'll get their schoolwork going, but then I'll take care of like the laundry and the food, because he just doesn't like to do either of those things. He'll wash, but he won't fold. So then I get stuck folding. Anyways, long story short, but there's like a lot of stereotypes, and these are things that affect your day to day. So if you go, Amaka, I think you're up next to talk about some more of the barriers that we're seeing.
Yes. So again, what I would attribute to stereotypes again is the barriers that women have or have faced in getting promoted, right? unfortunately, just based off of this Women in Tech report that we have here in front of you, they did a poll according to several women respondents, and they asked what are the biggest barriers to women in tech getting promoted, and 66% said no clear path forward, right? 41% said no mentorship, 39% said the company said they had limited budget, so that was their excuse. 39% said it was because of gender bias, 29% said it was because of a lack of trust in my abilities, 18% said racial bias, 16% said competitive culture, 10% lack of experience, 11% other. Well, actually, if you look at the first column, right, I actually have a big issue with that column. I think that no clear path forward is too vague. Just from experiences that I have had, and I know other women engineers have had, is that there typically is a clear path forward, but you see it with your male counterparts, right? So there's plenty of examples we can throw out where we see our male counterparts, they work for 5 years and then they're promoted to a certain level. And then you're like, okay, now I'm 5 years in, what happened to my promotion, right? And all of a sudden that clear path is muddled, right? So that's why I actually don't like that column. If I was in charge of this poll, I would not have included it. I would actually divide all of that and add it to everything that's to the right, because that to me, again, is gender bias, right? That, there's a clear path for the men, but for the women, there's always some type of hurdle, or for the minorities, there's always some type of hurdle that you have to kind of go through, and the path starts to get muddled, there's excuses given and things like that. So again, we'll talk about this more in future slides, but of course, if you're in a company that keeps giving you the runaround, if you can't find somebody to verify, if you can't find somebody to help you fix that situation as far as getting that promotion or raise and prove your case that you deserve it compared to your male counterparts, and of course you should leave that company. But we'll talk more about that later. But yes, these are, again, some of the main reasons why women are saying that they are not getting promoted, right? Or they're not moving up the ladder in tech and in engineering or STEM. Now here's just a quick graph. It's not related to STEM in particular, but I love it because it represents the corporate pipeline. And of course, anything that represents the corporate pipeline is probably worse for women in STEM anyway, so we can use this as a starting point. But as you can see, for entry level, men and women pretty much make up the same percentage of entry level workers. It's about 52 to 48 with men leading. And as you go up that ladder, right, if you go to the C-suite, you can see that it's only the white men that actually went up in percentage, right, in the leadership roles. And then for men of color and white women, that percentage decreased by less than 50%. And then for women of color, that percentage decreased by over 77%, right? So you get that double whammy of being a double minority, right? You're a woman and you're also a woman of color, right? So you can see how those stereotypes are affecting us as far as moving up the ladder. Now let's talk about other challenges, right? The low retention rate. So we see that there's this big push by the government, by everybody, by nonprofits to get more girls into STEM. STEM, it's everywhere now, right? But we keep forgetting what's happening at the other end of that pipeline. We're pushing for more girls to go in, but at the other end, the women are leaving, right? There's something happening that's making us uncomfortable that we're leaving, right? So this chart here actually is a female quit rate across science, engineering, and tech. And it says for science occupations, 47% of women actually will quit. Engineering occupations, 39% of women will quit. Technology occupations, 56% of women will quit, right? And then if you compare that to men in the high-tech industry, the quit rate is 41% for women and 17% for men, right? So just, there's something going on. New York Times article, actually, if you look at a quote from there at the bottom, it says that more than 50% of women in information and communications technology leave mainly because of a hostile environment. right? And then if we go to the next slide, I just have quick quotes from different ladies, female engineers who have left the field and just explaining why they left, right? So I'm gonna try to read this quickly. I don't know if we're short on time, but for a Latina civil engineering graduate, she said, women leave engineering due to a lack of job satisfaction, lack of reliable female role models, inflexible work schedules, work discrimination, white Midwestern syndrome, and glass ceiling issues. An Asian American operations engineering graduate said, most of the management is a male-dominated culture, male conversation topics, which Denise mentioned earlier, long hours, demanding lifestyle, career-focused expectations. Women usually choose to leave without fighting the uphill battle to make improvements. It's a self-sustaining cycle. And then for the last one, an African-American mechanical engineering graduate said, what ultimately led me to a B school and a non-engineering job was the lack of a viable career path, example, advancement, within the engineering organizations where I worked. In addition to that, most engineering organizations have promotion leadership funnels that are very, very narrow. So again, you see women are, again, complaining about lack of promotions, the bro culture, inflexible schedules, so many different things that are making us uncomfortable or making it difficult to thrive in this field. So let's turn this around and get a little bit more positive, right? Because we all love what we do. I love what I do. Denise loves what we do. And there are issues, there are challenges, but there's definitely plenty of companies out there, plenty of organizations and groups and people that are fighting for change, making a change to make this an easier place for women to navigate through. So for this section, we're going to be talking about the changes that we're seeing and what changes are needed, and also how to increase girls' interest in STEM. So we're going to reach out to the audience again, and we just want to know, you can type in chat or you can raise your hand as far as what changes do you see today? What positive changes do you see today? Emil, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
You're good. It's Emily.
Emily,
Honestly,
sorry.
I prefer Emil a lot better. It's way prettier. So I guess what changes I'd see today, I'm not in tech, I'm poli-sci. So in like more my career path, I'm seeing more women take on leadership roles, especially, trying to advance. I'm also the regional fellow for Ignite. So we're training a lot of women to run for political office. And it's just, I'm seeing more interest in people actually taking more engagement in our political atmosphere. But I did want to say something. I don't know about the changes, but something of concern. In the article, it talked about how since we don't have a lot of women in tech, a lot of women are writing algorithms. And since we're going to be moving towards, like the metaverse and all that type of stuff that's coming on into the news, women aren't actually writing the algorithms. And that's a huge concern for me. Just because like right now we're on Zoom and everything's becoming more tech-like. So it's seeing that kind of change. I do see that more women are taking initiative and joining programs, but unfortunately, like for low-income neighborhoods or low-income areas, they're not really going into these programs just because obviously lack of income. So I don't know, hopefully some programs could go into like low-income neighborhoods and start teaching girls how to actually engage themselves in tech. So yeah, I think I went on a tangent.
No, that's all great things to say. Yes, no, I mean, I definitely, relate with you on that one. And that's why I found the Tech Girl Power, because, I wanted to see more women of color and Black women in tech and science and engineering. And unfortunately in America, a large percentage of African Americans are, are from lower socioeconomic levels, right? So the nonprofit focuses on working with girls from lower socioeconomic levels, and we focus on exposing them to high-tech STEM kits only. We're not, we know that there's a tech divide, we know that there's a digital divide, and the only way to do that is through exposure and from early on, right? So there are definitely more organizations out there that are trying to do that. We see the importance of that. A study was done for racial parity in the workforce. It will take I think it was 95 years before we reach racial parity in the workforce. And that's not even STEM. STEM's probably worse as usual, but this is just in general, right? It'll take if we do what we're doing now, like what we're doing now, it'll take 95 years to reach racial parity, meaning 9% of Black women in America equals 9% of Black women in the workforce or in STEM or whatever. So, but if we actually do more, we could cut that down to, I think, 25, 30, 40 years, right? So I think it's very important that, we put the onus on companies and the government and organizations to make sure that we are reaching out to minorities, people from low income areas. It's very important. And I'm sure Denise can add on to what Microsoft is doing, but it's very important to me that I'm working for a company that sees that as an issue. And I know that they're doing something about it, and so we have to make sure, we have to force this to happen, pretty much, I would say. But anyways, Denise, go ahead.
You have to have people like Amaka who are making her girls build drones. Like, this is amazing. Like, she's like, what you're doing? What with drones? Like, I'm terrified of drones half the time, but she's figuring out how to like encourage the girls just to see something different. Along the lines of gender parity, MIT actually achieved gender parity in their mechanical engineering organization. And they actually made a concerted effort to change the way when you first go, orientation happens, or you go preview the school, they actually made sure that the girls that had any kind of math capabilities were going to preview, and the ringleader, the student that was showing them, was a sophomore that was a mechanical engineer, because so many kids enter the college and they don't know what they want to be and they don't know what they want to do. So where they would have these like sophomore or junior women who were studying mechanical engineering be the leaders for these groups of women who had math in, who liked math or had like math in their background. And they actually, like a couple years ago, achieved a 50-50 gender parity in mechanical engineering. So a lot of framing also goes into changing things as well. And we talked about on the chat some of the things, the STEM toys as well, that they're changing, and STEAM programs in school. Maria Clara said. Maya, you had a question about the challenges, and are we still continuing to fight an uphill battle? Yes, in some ways, at least I am. I know Amaka probably feels that way too. But it's worth it for me. I want to leave this place better than I found it. And the only way that I'm going to do that is if I stick around and fight for it and figure out how to bring more. I want to build a workplace where my 20-year-old self would have thrived, not survived. I survived my 20s and 30s in engineering. Okay. I survived. Now it's like, okay, well, survival is great, but I don't want it to be like that. So, and there's a lot more people like us, and companies are changing the way they're doing things. And I think in the next slide, what are companies doing today is part of that. One of the things I can share that Microsoft is doing, or that's different, is they're making diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion, or now diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. They're acknowledging that there's an equity piece and there's also belonging to the organization piece. So they're changing the dialogue, but they're also, those used to be things that are put in HR, the human resources departments within organizations. And if you have ever worked in if you haven't worked in a company yet, HR is kind of dicey. People have a general distrust for HR because HR is company and people, where they care about the people, but the company comes first, right? And so like HR has always been a dicey place to have the DEI stuff in it. So some of the things that we're doing, and I've seen in Microsoft, and I saw in my previous company at Magic Leap, they're putting program managers in charge of DEI, where the program manager reports directly to a senior leader. So the senior leader has goals, and a program manager reports to them and helps them see to those DEI goals. That's nothing tied to with the human resources department. So it's actually in my company, it's made a huge shift in the way diversity, equity, and inclusion are seen, as well as now it's part of our performance review. So once a year in a corporation, you usually have a performance review, and then you go about what you did all the year. And sometimes they do ranking, even though they don't call it ranking, it's still some form of ranking, where they determine your rewards or your bonus or et cetera. But there is a line item. What did you do for DE&I for the community and culture this year? The fact that they're putting it in as a line item makes people have to think about it. And then they start to question, and then they have to think about, like, what did I do? I didn't do anything. Okay, now I got to do something for my next performance review. So it forces the managers and the people to have that dialogue. So those are
Yes,
things that are really positive that's happening.
No, that's great. And again, it's companies have to be intentional, right? They have to be intentional. So this slide here just pretty much shows, you know, they did a poll amongst different women in tech, and they asked, what should tech companies do to support women in tech? And I would also equate that to engineering too. And 55% of women said that they would like to be offered equal maternity and paternity leave. 57% of women said that they would like the companies to conduct unconscious bias training, right? 64% of women said that they would prefer to see flexible scheduling and flexible location for their work. 72% of women said they would like to be provided mentorship opportunities. And 79% of women said that they would like to see more women promoted into leadership positions. So if you look at the last two, that's 72%, 79%, that's pretty high, right? And it'll be, when I go to the next slide, it's just going to be funny because I'll tell you what are young girls looking for in order to enter STEM, right? And it'll be the same thing, role models, because these last two things are pretty much women are looking for mentorship, and usually that comes from a role model. And then promoting women in leadership positions. So you want to see somebody who looks like you in leadership positions. So again, that's a role model type thing. And young girls, right, are also looking for that, right? To increase girls' interest in STEM, the New York Times article quoted and said, it found that studies have shown that the girls want more role models, right? Again, role models are very important because it's not 100% definite, but when you see somebody who looks like you in the space, you know you're welcome. You know that you're welcome. You know that it's a welcoming place for you, that you're going to thrive in that place, right? So that's why it's very important for companies and nonprofits, when we work with young girls, that we make sure that we're giving them that role model element, because we know how important that is for them to retain them in this field. With Tech Girl Power, we're making sure that our workshops are led by female engineers, scientists, techies, so that these girls can see women who look like them as role models that they can emulate, that they can see themselves in this field, that they see that they are welcome here, right? We're gonna move on to the advice section, and me and Denise, of course, like we said, she has 20 years of experience to kind of give tons of advice, and still also learning from her too, So, and mine with the 14 years experience of being in this male-dominated field, we have plenty of advice to give to get to how we got to where we are. My advice is going to pretty much be related to the last two parts of this poll, which is what most women wanted the most, was providing mentorship opportunities and promoting women in leadership, right? How do we get there, right? If women are not being promoted, if women are not, if you don't have a lot of women in STEM, how are you able to find your mentors? How are you able to find your sponsors? How are you able to move up the ladder, right? And just based off what I experienced, right? I call myself an introverted leader because I am an introvert. I was very shy and quiet, especially when I was starting off 14 years ago. I thought if I would just go sit in a cubicle and do my engineering and just do a good job, my bosses were going to be like, Amaka, you're doing such a great job. Here's a promotion, right? I thought it would just happen because I was doing a good job, right? But that didn't happen, right?
Nope.
I started to see my counterparts, and mostly male, they would reach that 5-year or whatever years of experience needed to move up the ladder, and they immediately would get that promotion. And I'm sitting there like 2 years after that, I've met that requirement. Like instead of the 5, I'm 7 years in. I'm like, wait, why don't I have this promotion yet? What's the reason behind it? And once I learned, I don't want to call it a game, but like once I learned how once I learned what was happening in that industry, I started to, I don't want to say adapt, but I started to see what I would need to do to make my own path in STEM, right? So number one, a lot of women statistically, we do not self-promote, right? We do not ask for raises. We are uncomfortable asking for raises. We're uncomfortable asking for negotiating our salary when we get a job. I took the first salary handed to me. I did not ask for an extra 5,000. I should have, right? But I took whatever I felt lucky, like, oh gosh, I got a job. I felt lucky, right? We do not self-promote. We do not ask for promotions. All of that makes us very uncomfortable. There's even a study where men will go after a promotion or a job, and they're only like, I forgot
Qualified
the
for
exact
20%.
percentage.
They're only qualified for 20% of
exactly.
it. And
They're
women,
not
it's like,
100%
I have,
qualified.
and women's like,
Exactly.
I need 100% of the
Yes.
qualifications.
And women are like, I need to be 100% qualified before I even turn in my resume. So that's something that I would give as an advice, right? To self-promote, be comfortable self-promoting, right? The bottom advice that I have there, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Be comfortable self-promoting. I had a manager tell me like, oh, you don't have to copy me on emails or anything. I'm going to see what you're doing. They're too busy. They're not seeing what you're doing, right? I saw my male counterparts self-promoting. I did the same thing. I started to copy my manager on emails. I started to make sure that people were seeing what I was doing, right? The next thing is networking and finding sponsors and mentors. A sponsor is somebody that will speak your name in rooms that you are not invited to, right? So if there was a meeting I was not invited to, a sponsor would, if they saw an opportunity came up and we had already spoken about, my goals for my career, that person would speak my name in that room. And that's how my career started to change. Once I found sponsors, once I found mentors. Now, how did I do that? I am introvert, I'm shy, I'm a woman, only Black person. How did that happen? Right? There was no Black female mechanical engineer that would mentor me or sponsor me. She didn't exist. Right. So I had to, and like Denise said, she mentioned about the bro culture and like talking about sports and all, like I wasn't into sports. I wasn't into any of that. I had to find my own way of connecting and networking. And what I want you guys to know that, yes, it might seem dire, but there are plenty of people in tech and STEM that want to see you succeed as a woman, right? There are plenty, and there are plenty of allies, men out there that also want to see us succeed. So that's what I saw when I started to network in my own way and reaching out to people for mentorship and for sponsorship, connecting them in different ways, connecting with them with different ways. I'm never going to be into sports, so I couldn't connect with sports, but I would connect with other ways, maybe with travel or sometimes even religion, which I know you're not supposed to talk about, or politics, but I found some other ways to connect with my allies, basically, who wanted to see me grow. And then I would communicate, this is what I'm looking for and career-wise, this is where I want to grow. And that's when I started to see things happen. Once I started to network and connect, that's when I started to see my career shift, right? Getting the promotions after, and getting raises, things like that. So that definitely helped me in that aspect. But again, it's all about, getting comfortable being uncomfortable and not, once you hit a wall, try to walk around it. If you find somebody that's not willing to sponsor or mentor you or is giving you a hard time, go around, find somebody else. But there's always somebody in STEM and tech that will not look like you, that's willing to be an ally and wants to see you succeed. And I'm going to turn it over to Denise, because getting comfortable being uncomfortable is kind of like a mindset, which you will go more deeper into.
Yeah, I wanted to touch upon two things that Amaka said, that whole, heads down, work hard, and you're going to get promoted. And I had the same exact like aha moment in my late 20s. And it was, I realized, we go to school, right? Women are exceptionally good at going to school. You give us boundaries, you tell us when this thing is due, and we just go and get it done. There's a reason why more women go to college and have graduate degrees than men do. Like, they like to know what the edges are and what's required, right? So you're used to going to school, you work really hard, you get an A on the test, your GPA goes up, your GPA is good, you get a good job. and then that's not the way it works in the real world. Okay, it doesn't, you don't get graded now. It's a whole different ball game. So your mindset shifts. That's the shift from that, like, I got to get a good job, I got to get a good grade gets me a good job or a good internship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Because it's just an opening of the door. But then when you go into corporate world, it's not that way anymore. And there's the thing about asking. Amaka said as well, hey, go and ask. Like, somebody said no. Okay, so what? They said no today. That doesn't mean they're going to say no tomorrow. You got to keep asking for it. And it's not the way women are taught. Like, men are taught, like my dad and my brother had this most awful conversation one time when we were in a cruise and I was in my 20s, but it was an aha moment for me. It was like, my dad's like, you just got to go up to the girl and ask her if she wants to, whatever. And I'm like, ew, Dad, like, why would you, like, but my dad's like, so what? If she smacks you on the face, who cares? Go up to the next one. I'm like, oh my gosh, number one, that's awful. And number two, I don't want to know. But like, women are not taught to go ask. Women are taught to wait until you're asked. And so there is definitely some of that is changing with the next generation. My generation was more of that kind of older way. With like this quote from the article, it's still a geek and male culture. And it's, one of the things I want to share on how you get around these things or the things that I've learned for myself. And if you go into the next slide, it's the growth mindset. First, it's imposter syndrome. Okay, so if you guys haven't heard of it, imposter syndrome is a real thing. I have 20 years of experience and I still go to Microsoft every once in a while and I'm in a meeting and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know why I'm here. Like, there's no, like, these people are going to find out that I am not what they think I am at some point in time. And that 20 years of engineering experience. And I run circles around most of these people. And my boss says, I'm doing a fantastic job. And I have like higher than expected performance reviews constantly, right? And I still feel like I'm an imposter, like I don't belong at Microsoft. like they're just gonna find out how crappy I am. And it's imposter syndrome is real, right? Which is why also I love being at the edge of technology, being in this mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality space. No one knows what the hell they're doing. They really don't. Nobody's figured out how to make money in this space. Microsoft's still trying to figure it out. Okay, so like, it's a great place to be because I don't know and they don't know and they definitely can't know because no one's done it before, right? So like, I'm in a good, like, for my like imposter syndrome, I'm in a great space because no one knows what they're doing. So I'm pretty cool with that because I really work well in ambiguity. Not everybody does that. And like the growth mindset, if you go into the next slide, well, there's like this really awesome chart on adoption of technology. You have your innovators, your early adopters, your early majority, late majority, and laggards. And this is like a well-known statistics. Your innovators, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs in the 70s were your innovators. 10 years later, they're building computers that now make it into that early majority category, right? So Bill Gates, when you're in that edge of technology, you are in that early adopter innovator phase. And a lot of people in tech do this. A lot of the guys who have seen succeed in their career do this. That one of the head guys is like, oh, there's a new programming language called Rust, and over spring break, I built something on it. And I'm like, what the hell? Why would you do that? So now this is something I've started to adopt for myself. So over the holidays, I took like 2 hours to spend on web AR. I don't know about websites and I don't know how the hell to build a web AR experience, but I found myself a tutorial on Wix. Wix of all places had a tutorial on how to add AR to your website, and I have a small business. So I'm like, all right, let's figure out how to do this. So I followed their tutorial. I failed like 20 times, had to go to Stack Overflow a bunch of other times. But, at the end of the day, when now I tell people, it's like, oh, I played with web AR over the holiday. They're like, what, you did what? So now like, this is a trick that some of those people play to like, get told, like all the time I say like, oh, I played with like these pixels or this stuff from Adafruit or Arduino or blah, 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 blah. Because I like to make lights go blinky, blinky. That's kind of one of my things. So I'm always playing with things. And then when I tell people, then they're super impressed about more so that than my actual job. So, one of the things that I do a lot of is talk about mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality, that edge of technology, and why it's an awesome place to be. And I'm going to shut up now because I could keep going on, and we want to leave some time for some questions. All of 3 minutes. So fire away.
This slide does not work. Okay, there we go. Any questions from the audience?
So Andrea says, I feel like speaking for myself personally, that as a woman raised by other women who taught me to make others comfortable, yep, that I end up taking and feeling uncomfortable. Man, that like, I have been in jokes that you're like, dude, like that's so inappropriate. But you're like, smile and nod and smile and nod. Yeah, I totally feel that.
Yeah, same
Um,
here for gender and race, where it's very uncomfortable. But I do appreciate when if I work in a company where I can freely, because I have been lucky enough to work in companies where I can freely say like, hey, that sounds a little, this off, right? And then we can have a conversation about it and work through. So I've been lucky enough to be in those companies, but a lot of people, of course, are not.
yeah, I mean, it still happens. It's just part of life, but it's changing. There's less of it. I'm so
Lots
much
of
more
training
comfortable
by
than I was.
companies are being done too. Yes.
Oh yeah, lots of training. I'm gonna read Macarena's thing and then Michelle, I know you have your hand up. So you work in a male-dominated field, and I believe the key to succeed is having great leaders. It is so true. Having a manager is like night and day. If you hate your manager and you love your job, find yourself another manager. I had to do that, and I could go on in this story, but I had a toxic manager, but I loved my job. So I interviewed a bunch of people who knew what I was capable of. And like one of them is that I said, this guy, I like this guy. He's a great leader. This is who I want to work with. And like moving to that team, it took me 6 months to get onto that team because my a-hole manager didn't want to let me go. Yeah, there was a whole politics thing there. But yeah, finding a good leader is more important than actually what you do or where you work. They will
Yes.
make space for you and make you be your best self and bring your
Yes.
whole self to work every day.
Agreed.
And Michelle.
So tech super novice here, layman's term, please. But question. So one of the things that I at least I'm aware of, and actually I feel like it came up in conversation in the chat a little earlier, is this idea of tech being designed by populations, right? And therefore being designed for those populations. So things like algorithms tend to favor, right, white men because they were written by white men. At the end of the day, we're talking about tech, but it was created by a human brain, right? So all the biases and things that happen in that mind are kind of imposed on that tech. So algorithms are one that I'm like somewhat aware of, that we can all as a society benefit from women having more influence in, or just diversifying the influence in those things. What other kinds of tech development things are there that we can also diversify to impact the way that we live?
There's so many things. It's why one of the reasons why representation matters so much. It's not like they intentionally meant to exclude women, or in situations like the hand dryers sometimes don't work for people with darker skin. And I didn't know, like, that wasn't a thing for me because the hand dryers always work for me because my skin is white. And then I was at work one day where somebody had mentioned this. Yeah, like it doesn't work on Black people more often than it does on dark skinned people than it does on white skinned people. And it's probably because the engineer who was doing the testing was a white guy. And he was like, hey, it works on, off, on, off, on, off. Great, ship it, right? And they didn't, like, there was nobody else, no product managers, nobody else that had a different representation when they were doing, there's this whole like, there's a movie called Coded Bias, and this amazing engineer called Joy Bulamwini, and you can just check her out on YouTube. She has like a little video on research that she did on face detection and facial algorithms and how it wouldn't detect her face. She had to put on a white mask in order for the face detection to actually work on her, which is like so freaking awful. There's so much, and now like with algorithms and computer science, we're moving more and more in that. Like all these devices, all the cameras, all the stuff that's in these devices. It's one of the reasons that we do this work. I know I do it to connect with the community, to share the stories, to just raising awareness is really important, but then also inspiring people. I love my career. I would not trade my engineering career for any other career right now. At one point I thought I wanted to be a teacher, but now it's like, okay, I can I can build mixed reality curriculum that other teachers can use. And that's how I can still like scratch that itch of being a teacher and like having that impact on a community. And I hope like it's not all gloom and doom. Like, yeah, it has its bad points, but every single career has its bad points. If you've ever been, so I have a small business and and it's a pottery studio. It's not really a big deal, but I sometimes have customers that are just like the worst people in the world. And then I have the most amazing customers that fill my cup. My cup overflows with the joy that they bring me. And so, those people that give me joy are more than the people that make me sad. And even in engineering, yeah, there's those horrible stories. I had terrible manager, but I got out from under him and I learned so much actually from being from that situation that now I'm a better person for it and now have a better career because he was such an idiot. Yeah. And I don't know if I answered your question, Michelle or Amaka, if you have more to add to that.
I think you were pretty precise.
Any other questions in the chats? Or anybody else want to unmute or say hello or share an experience?
I had a quick question. I don't know if you mentioned this. I know you mentioned both of you being in an audience or, a space full of engineers and being the only woman or the only woman of color. And what I'm wondering is, do you find that you're treated differently as a woman? And if that happens, how do you handle it?
I know for me, because in my job, we sometimes go out to the field to do inspect the machinery in order to tell the owner if they should replace their bridge or not, things like that. And I have to put on the hard hats and go under the bridge, get dirty and things like that. So if I'm out there and it's not my coworkers, a lot of the guys will like, oh, let me do this for you, let me do that for you, that kind of thing. Initially, I joke with my coworkers and I'm like, let me take advantage of sexism. I'm like, yeah, here you go. Like, but no, like, you get that, men trying to help you thinking like, oh, you're not, don't hurt yourself type of thing. In the field also, I've gotten, lots of sexist statements, right? Made at me. In the office with coworkers, typically are great, but there's also subconscious bias where, mansplaining happens a lot, with people who don't think they're doing it, but it's happening. Being spoken over, or if I say something, it's ignored and somebody else, if a guy says it, it's like, oh yeah, it's such a great idea. All of those things that women complain about, we go through it, right? It's a reality. But again, there's the way I see it, being a minority woman, a Black woman in this field, I don't want to say it is what it is. I'm doing my best to change it, but also I am trying to, stick it through, right? So I'm trying to work around it. Yes, there's going to be more obstacles that I have to overcome, unfortunately, which sucks, but I want to make sure that, the girls coming after me are going through less obstacles, right? And the only way to do it is to stick through it. Because if I quit, it's going to continue, so it becomes a cycle. So that's my thing. It's tough. And when it happens, I acknowledge it. That's why I love to practice mindfulness. I acknowledge it's happening, and then I just have to kind of let it go and like, okay, how can I fix this situation? How can I work around it? And that's the only option I have a lot of times, right? And luckily, again, I've been lucky enough to work for companies where I can speak up a little bit and like go in to talk like, hey, what you said was a little this or that. I've been lucky enough to be in that situation. I know plenty of women who have not, right? So I think that's why it's very important to interview the company that you're going into also. That's very, very important.
Just to add a little more tactics to what Amaka said, a lot of these guys that you work with are fathers and they have daughters, right? So they're more reasonable than you would actually think and open to suggestions, especially like, the ones that are in the leadership team or, their senior principal or whatever engineers. It's important to have allies and to be able to call it out when you see it. It's kind of hard to call it out when it's happening to you because it's so personal and feels so personal. But I've seen, there was this woman I worked with, Emily Mount, and she's absolutely amazing. And she now works for Google. But she would actually call it out. It's like, hey, Paul, did you see how you just completely railroaded over Denise in that meeting? I don't know about you, but I noticed it. Did you think you railroaded over her? Oh, you didn't? Okay, well, maybe I'm just exaggerating, but you kind of just did that. But she would do this and take people aside and do this a lot. And so she actually became a trusted advocate, even for the senior leadership team, who would constantly go back to her because she'd call them out on it. They wanted to be better. They didn't want people to feel like marginalized or bad. And because it's hard to call it, but it's hard to call it out when it's yourself. So if you can find an ally and you like have that pact with them to call it out, or like, hey, so-and-so, like he's a good person, but he's like just not, like he's just completely ignorant that he is a complete and total idiot during these situations, and maybe we can make him better, right? And like you kind of like build on each other to do that. So allies is important, and those allies are not necessarily women. They could be totally, they're totally men too. And usually they'll reach out to you and say, hey, how can I support you? How can I help, right? And take advantage when people say that, how can I help or how can I support you? It's like, hey, I need help with this situation. Tell me if you see this X, Y, and Z thing happening, because I do, and I feel it, and I don't know how to have this conversation with this person. But you have to, you have to be generous and always assume generous intent on the other person's side. They're not trying to be jerks. They're just complete and total ignoramuses most of the time.
Yeah,
Some are complete and total jerks. Most of them are just ignorant.
A lot of it is subconscious bias. And that's why, again, it's very important that you interview that company and make sure that they're providing unconscious bias training to a lot of the leadership, so that people, because a lot of leaders have to be intentional with it, and make sure that they're questioning themselves and seeing if they are actually, implementing the things to prevent unconscious bias, right? So very, very important, the company that you're going to also, definitely. Because a lot of what Denise is saying is a lot of what my company WSP is doing, and I've gone through all the training also, and everything that she said, there's videos of how to handle those situations and things like that. And it's required for all people in management to take that, so.
Well, I know everyone here is super glad they came today. Thank you, Amaka and Denise, for sharing the changes and challenges that are happening out there in the engineering and tech fields. I know I personally feel more positive about the things that are happening than before I attended this. So thank you both. And it's been great having you here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
I think we have that poll up again. If you're still with us and you want to tell us if and how your attitudes toward women in engineering and tech have changed, go ahead and throw it up in the poll while it's still here. Yay.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Awesome.
Curious to see if we have, if we skewed positivity towards the end, Amaka, because it was really dire for a little bit, and it is,
Yeah,
but it's okay.
It is. It's the truth. It's reality, right? But there are plenty of companies that are, see, 5 and 4.
Woo! Hearts
no
and
3s,
minds.
No 2s, no 1s. Yeah.
Yay.
That's great. That's great.